Well, hello. I am your host, Tracy Otsuka. Thank you so much for joining me here for another episode of ADHD for Smartass Women. You know that my purpose is always to show you who you are and then inspire you to be it. And in the thousands of ADHD women that I've had the privilege of, never met one that wasn't truly brilliant at something, not one. So, of course, I am just delighted to introduce you to Brandy Agerbeck. Brandy Agerbeck's path to ADHD diagnosis was long and winding because she had always used drawing to harness her bucking bronco of a brain. Pen and paper in hand, Brandy would reduce her chronic overwhelm by drawing out everything she was holding inside. She could make great use of her smarts by mapping out ideas, and she enjoyed and still enjoys creating flow state on demand. This kind of drawing is called visual thinking, and Brandy is an international speaker and a pioneer of the work. In 2016, she published The Shapers, The Power of Putting Your Thinking in Your Own Hands, a visual thinking guide based on her TED Talk, which is excellent, by the way. You should go watch it. Brandy lives in Chicago with her cuddly and clean husband and their two house panthers. Brandy, I'm assuming those are cats and not real panthers. She's a nerd for odd
Yes,
little museums, escape rooms, and crafts that use bits. Welcome, Brandy. Did I get all of that right?
that sounds like me. I think I'm in the right place.
Perfect. So I always want to talk about the ADHD diagnoses first. And so I would love to know if you would be willing to share that with us.
Very happy to share. I think of it as a bit like a Mobius strip where it kind of winds around and connects to itself. And before before I ever had any would have ever thought ADHD was a label that made sense for me, the way I saw myself, I used two different adjectives. One was I have a very fast brain. And so that's for me has always been a real gift. And when folks say
Oh,
they
yeah.
really beat themselves up because they walk into a room and they forgot why they walked into that room, right? Like it's a really common thing. I always say to myself, by the time I start, like
Yeah.
from that doorway to where I am now, I've thought 13 different things. How could I possibly remember? So that fast brain was like, all right, it's fast. That's cool. Like I can do a lot of good stuff with it. And the other description was because of my sense, like I've very much have a lot of sensory stuff that I've worked around
Oh,
and built a world that works for me. But
yeah,
basically, I describe it as I'm
totally.
always turned up to 11. Like all receptors are open, right? Does that, you understand what I'm saying? And, right, which can be really good in certain circumstances, very intense, like noticing everything, hearing everything, sensing everything, super duper fantastic intuition, right? All these good things. And
Yeah.
when I have so much of that, then it's crashing. So it's like it's 11 or 0 and nothing in between, right? So those were a couple things that were like kind of coming into this into all of this adventure. And about 5 years ago, a good friend of mine who is a super talented medical illustrator named Megan, she was posting ADHD memes. And, I'm looking at these memes, knowing that her and I are kind of built
Hmm.
similarly. And the two specific things in those memes that really hit home
Uh,
was time blindness, having, really no concrete sense of time, and ADHD tax.
yeah.
We have to spend extra money because we lose things, or like we're running late and we have to pay for getting the Uber to wherever we're going, right? Like all those that tax that adds up. Holy crow, yes. Totally, totally. So those are the two things that were kind of like that glimpse into, oh, wait a second, there's something here. And then when I read the self-assessment, like the criteria, the one that rang every bell was, do you tend to be on the go or act as if driven by a motor? Years and years ago, I was, unfortunately, I was in a lot of chronic pain, exhausted, and I walked into this office of a specialist in chronic pain at an integrative medicine practice, brilliant human. The first thing he says in that first conversation is, it seems like you're really good at stepping on the gas pedal, but you don't know how to step on the brake. And I'm like, you got it. You got it. So, all these kind of symptoms of, kind of walking around this, right? So years later, as looking at these memes and recognizing myself, and I at this time I'm now seeing this wonderful nurse practitioner, and I just in our
Oh,
normal annual appointment, I said, I think I might have ADHD. And she goes, oh yeah, oh yeah. So the best description I've heard of that is a Ferrari brain with bicycle brakes. And I was like, yes. I just had to laugh. It was like, yes, yeah, exactly. And she said, okay, well, the next step is to go get a psych evaluation, and here's a referral. Now, I so appreciate you just published this episode about getting a diagnosis, and it is solid gold. It is full of so much good stuff. And I know that you'll hear how twisty my path was, but I have to acknowledge that I have a whole lot of privilege in that I am self-employed, but I have my husband's insurance. I'm on my husband's insurance. I'm in a big city. My main doctor is my nurse practitioner is in an integrative medicine practice. So I'm working with somebody who is looking at me as a whole human being. So I already have a whole lot of things like pointing in the right direction that a lot of people struggle with, right? So
Yeah.
she gives it, so I get this referral for the psych evaluation. And the
Trauma.
first thing is I have a medical history interview with a neurologist.
Yeah.
And I was just like, she starts in with the family of origin stuff. And, I have a very high ACE score, adverse childhood experience score, lots of not good stuff in the past, right? And the thing is, I've worked on it. Yeah, trauma side 6 different directions, right? And I've worked through it, and it's like, yeah, I know that's part of my past, but it's not something I love carrying with me still, right? So we have this whole medical history, and I go through all of it. And, I'm like, at the end of it, I'm like, I bet she's going to write this off as big old broad trauma. Yep, you see where this is going. Or that I have adapted too well. Like I'm not checking off enough of those boxes of being broken or impaired or, this is getting in my way. So I just kind of, set that aside. And then I toddled off to the lab to get the psych evaluation.
Yeah.
I love tests. I am in my happy place. I am a science nerd. I love tests. The young man who was doing the testing was delightful. And I did 8 hours of testing in 5.5 hours. It's just like zooming, right? And the challenge of like all these different, interesting, different tests. So I'm having a blast. And, there's a couple that were like really visual, and I would ask him like, can I have more like that? He's like, no, that's the only one. I'm like, all right. But the last test, which you talked about on a recent episode, I think it was with Jessica, the mosaic artist, the TOVA test.
Yeah. It's a computer test. It tests impulsivity.
And, so at the very last end of all these hours of testing, they sit you in front of this computer. I think you had said yours was showing you different shapes. The one I had, anytime I saw the letter E, I had to hit the space bar, right? And that was the version I got. And so as I'm doing this test, I'm doing the things I have adapted to in this situation. So my leg is wiggling, right? Like I've got the kinetic energy of my leg wiggling. And the whole time my eyes are darting all over the room, but I'm keeping the screen in my periphery, right? So this is how I'm able to stay tuned in to this stupid freaking test and notice when the E's are happening, because I'm not staring at the screen and fuzzing out, right? So I've adapted. I know this is just one of the things I do where it's like, if I keep glancing around, if I keep moving, I'm stimulating, right? I'm keeping things moving in my brain. And as I'm doing it, I'm like, I bet I am failing this test by not failing.
Yes. Overperforming. But this is very common because it's different.
Exactly. So I walk out of that lab and of course a couple weeks later I get the follow-up call from the neurologist, and sure enough, she says, well, here's your IQ. Okay, great. And then she said, you've got depression, anxiety, and complex PTSD. And yeah. And she said, you have to show impairment in school, work, and relationships.
Wait, it was and? It wasn't or. She said you had to show impairment in all those areas?
It's a good question. I don't remember if she specified that. But basically, what happened was, the medical history feels like a checklist, right? We have to ask all these questions, go down this checklist. And then, the follow-up is painting me with these extremely broad brushes. So thankfully with my nurse practitioner years ago, I was in a very, very hard place. She diagnosed me with depression. I was, having those intrusive thoughts, and anyone who's had those intrusive thoughts knows that they're not real, but they're persistent. And thankfully, because she was a nurse practitioner, because she knew my whole biology and chemistry, she said, midlife, you'll appreciate this, talking about midlife diagnoses. She's like, you don't have a problem with serotonin, you have a problem with dopamine. So she saved me a world of hurt by putting me immediately on Wellbutrin, bupropion. Yeah. And guess what? Off label for ADHD, right? Didn't know that at the time. So the depression diagnosis made sense. Great, already there. Anxiety felt like an itchy sweater that didn't fit. I was like, this just doesn't feel right. And then the complex PTSD was kind of like, well, duh. It's like, so it was so broad. And then when you think about the broad categories we're looking for impairment in, well, in school, I was the weird little kid who brain moved really fast, tested well, and I would change assignments to make them more challenging and more creative. And thankfully, you see, right? So I was incredibly lucky to have teachers who were like, well, okay, Brandy's being Brandy. The big thing was they knew I wasn't trying to get out of work because I was making things challenging and creative, and I wasn't disruptive. So I wasn't a problem. So I was given all this latitude all throughout school that was just like, okay, she's going to do her thing, no problem. And then, yeah.
Where did you grow up? Where did you grow up?
Just north of the Twin Cities, suburban Twin Cities in Minnesota.
Okay. Maybe it was in your TED Talk somewhere where you said that you were able to turn in, it was a literature assignment with one set. Was it Shakespeare? What was it?
In high school, I turned in a one-sentence essay on Hamlet, and the sentence was, it's sort of like the Polonius saying, to thine own self be true. The one sentence was, if you cannot be yourself, you cannot be. That was you, and that's what you do with this podcast. And thankfully, my English teacher, Mr. Liu, again, he knew I wasn't trying to get away with something. There was something he recognized that I don't know that he had these words to it, and it took me a long time, that I just have a very, very, very my brain loves synthesis. My brain loves, what is that big idea? What is the big picture? What is the meaning out of everything I've read in this play? That was the takeaway. So, again, very, very lucky that I had teachers who were like, all right, Brandy's being Brandy. Not a problem.
So I'm curious, though, Brandy, did he make you do something creative to go along? Did he literally say, you can turn in that one sentence because you were so engaging during class, he knew you had read the material, blah, blah, blah? Because that's a great teacher.
Oh, he was, absolutely. That is a good question. I want to say I might have actually written something as a backup. I can't remember exactly, but it was, again, he could see beyond that specific follow the rules assignment, which plenty of people who are neurodiverse of all kinds, they get stuck, and this is regular old public school, but unfortunately, they are in systems or with teachers who just can't see them for who they are. And, they're always trying to push those students into their system.
No, I'd love to know, what were you like as a child? So not as a teenager, but as, that before 7 kid, before they imprint you and try to get you into that factory model.
Totally. I was the kid who was constantly making stuff, super creative, very, very crafty, always drawing. Truly, the genesis story my family tells is when I was 2.5, my aunt brought me a coloring book, and they put me in what's called a baby butler, which is kind of like a high chair with a big table with an edge on it, like a 1970s high chair, basically. And the story goes that they put me in this chair with the coloring book and crayons, and I was silent for 3 hours. talk about hyperfocus. I was wired this way, right? And they kind of realized after a while, like, oh, she hasn't said anything. And the story goes that I was drawing patterns, like I was drawing plaid instead of coloring in the coloring book because nobody taught me how to use the coloring book, right? So that was very much like the mode my entire life was drawing, crafting. I always loved animals, always very much in my head. I'm one of those folks that I know not this isn't everybody's story. I really enjoy my own company. I do not need a lot of time around other people. So a lot of my experiences growing up were solo and doing my own thing. And I was and happily, as much as there were absolute issues in my family growing up, I always like to say I was raised by a Muppet family, not a Disney family. Like we were very much like the nonconformity was a plus. So, it was very much we were taught to be creative and resourceful, very much like it took way after all of this diagnosis, many, many months later, was when I recognized so much of the manipulation and abuse that I got from my dad was because I was wired exactly the same way as he was. And I knew it was because I knew I had enough understanding to know that I was supposed to do all the things he didn't do. But only very recently did I understand it was because he was wired the same way. And I could put together those pieces of understanding. Oh, this is where it fell apart for him when he left the army and lost the structure, right? This is why he self-medicated, because his brain was going constantly. All right, so getting to understand those in hindsight.
What strikes me as so fascinating with you is that you talk about these challenges, but it sounds like you never really were beating yourself up about them, like your fast brain or even the sensory stuff, which, if you have a kid with a bunch of sensory stuff and you can't relate as a parent, I could see how annoying that would be for the parent, right? And so you probably would get a lot more negative messages, but you didn't seem to absorb those.
I appreciate that. And it is true, and to a certain extent is absolutely true. I like to say that my inner critic is actually quite small and quiet, and part of that is because I had a very loud outer critic, right? And I very much had the dad who is like, "Why are you so sensitive? What's wrong with you? Like, why don't you understand this?" Right? At the same time, he did recognize how creative and how smart I was. So, it wasn't all negative, but it was, very much his inner critic was coming out of his mouth pointed at me. And even though I didn't have those words when I was little, I understood that at some level. Like there was some kind of intuition or knowing that it was like, oh, this is his stuff, not my stuff, even though I had to navigate it and I had to get out of there, as soon as I could, right? So, yeah, definitely my brand of inner critic doesn't tell me I can't do things or I'm not worthy. My inner critic says, you have to do the work of 3 people and do it impeccably.
Yes. I call us next people, right? It's like everybody's celebrating. We're like, oh, that's boring. Next, what is the next thing that I can conquer?
Yeah,
Yeah.
there's always more to do. There's always more to do. And, I was recently teaching this workshop on executive functions, and I was talking about this, perseverance, goal-directed persistence, like the getting over the finish line, and that a part of that is celebrating what you accomplished. And I always say I'm really bad at that because, when I said I was really bad at that, unfortunately, I think the folks in that workshop probably thought I was being hard on myself. It was like, no, I'm just super excited to jump to the next thing. So yeah, thankfully, I had some kind of understanding of what was mine and what was his. And I think, so I would never have related to that label of ADHD because I've always been very physical, always been very much about making and making things tangible, but I didn't have that kind of, probably, the girl enculturated to be quiet and polite, right? And just had a certain kind of outlet that was much more, between me, my brain and my hands than bouncing around. But that, another part of that was so often with ADHD, people are said, you're not living up to your potential and you're lazy. Well, I was like potentialing like crazy. And no one could call me lazy, right? So I never would have thought that.
Exactly. And so, did you find that the people around you were uncomfortable with your drivenness? It was like, you're making me feel bad about myself because I'm lazy compared to you. Do you ever get any of that feeling?
I really love that question. The form it took for me was usually that, I mean, I certainly got messages that I was too much, that I was a lot, right? And thankfully that was just like, okay, fine, I don't care. Like, this is who I am. Yeah. And the version usually showed up as, once I became friends with somebody, so consistently they would say when they first met me, they were intimidated. And, then they realized that I had a great conversation with a college classmate, and it was so funny. His name was Mark, and Mark goes, you're a lot. You're a lot. And I go, but in a really appreciative way, because he's, a fellow weirdo. Two glorious weirdos talking to each other. Like, we were completely on the same frequency. And he said, he's just kind of smiling and nodding. He's like, you're a lot. And I said, my being a lot, my being big, my being a lot has absolutely nothing with making anyone else feel small. And that's the distinction. There was always sort of I'm going to be who I am. And if it's not your deal, that's cool. But for a lot of people, it was that, oh, she's so herself that it would make them uncomfortable, whether it was, it was just a lot, or it was because they weren't feeling like themselves. So that's why I love how you always talk about showing people who they are so they can be themselves. Like, that's why it was like such a perfect, like, Tracy is my people as soon as I heard that message.
I think you're the perfect example of post traumatic growth. So, socially, when you were a kid, I guess high school, college, whatever, any struggles there, or were you just so busy beating to your own drum that you didn't really care what was going on around you?
Uh, the best comparison of who I was in high school, especially, is if you've seen the movie Rushmore, the character of Max Fisher. He's this kid who is in every freaking activity, doing everything. It's worth seeing if you haven't seen it. It's
I
a very
haven't
sweet
seen it.
movie.
Heard of it. Okay, it's
Yeah,
called Rushmore.
yeah. It was Wes Anderson's second movie, and it is
Ah,
delightful.
Anderson. Okay.
So yeah. So I was in my senior yearbook 30 times because I was in every freaking activity. And part of the reason I was in every freaking activity was because I
Hmm.
wasn't at home.
Yes,
Being at school was
exactly.
safe. So that made a huge difference. I grew up going to a nature center every Sunday, which kept me, which was a great experience
Yeah.
working with a naturalist, doing all sorts of great, creative, weird projects at the nature center, working with a man named Scott, who is like just the best, chillest person ever. But both of those cases were, a lot of it was, like I said, being away from my home as much as I could as a way, just a safety mechanism. And and I was just kind of like off the social radar. And I was fine with that. Like, it was one of those things where I definitely had my own experience of high school and was perfectly fine with it. And I remember my 5-year reunion where I was like a little leery, like, whatever, I am who I am. But I had had a particular experience of somebody who I thought that's not who they were. And I realized that a high school friend hated me, and every time I left the room, talked behind my back, which was very destabilizing, right? Exactly. Again, about her, not me, but boy, howdy. For somebody who's perceptive to have no idea that was happening, yeah, you're nodding, and you know what that feels like. And so at that reunion, I was kind of worried it was going to be that person times however many people, right? Thankfully, no. Like, a lot of people are just kind of like, yeah, you just kind of did your own thing, and that was cool. So, it worked. And I happened to choose a college that was full of weirdos. Like, I went to a school that was very unstructured. I went to Grinnell, which is in the middle of Iowa, was at the time the second hardest college in the country behind MIT. So, talking about loving a challenge. I look back at those years in the early 90s, mid 90s. That was a campus full of neurodiverse kids, and nobody had the language for what that was. But yet, it gave us the space to be weirdos, and we had found our fellow weirdos, so it worked. It worked.
Oh, what did you study?
When I walked into Grinnell, I thought I was going to be a biology major, because I had a fantastic biology teacher. And I loved that it was hands-on learning and it was about structures and systems. And I like to say that I got down to the phospholipid bilayer of cell biology and I was done. And then I became a studio art major to nobody's surprise.
Mhm. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. So, what has changed since you were diagnosed?
So, great example of how I was able to adapt to school, right? And then when it came to work, I've always worked for myself. I've always been self-employed. So there was never any friction of trying to fit this weirdo into somebody else's workplace. And then when it came to relationships, in hindsight, I was very good at having the hyperfixation crush on the wrong person or the person uninterested and was single a whole heck of a lot and was honestly again liking my own company. It wasn't a big deal. So it wasn't until I was 40 and he was 37 that I met, my kind of weirdo and have a wonderful partner now. But when you think about defining ourselves in terms of impairment and what's broken, I was like, I don't check any of those boxes, because I've just had this completely other path, right?
You know what you are? You are an eternal optimist. You're an optimist. No matter thrown at you, you were willing to separate out, okay, that's their thing. This part I will take, and I'm going to move on this way. Like you don't get mired in the muck, right?
I would absolutely agree. And I always see it as I love problem solving. And I don't see problems as problems, right? I see problems as an interesting exercise and a way to find a better solution. I don't have to spend a lot of time in problem. Yeah, no, totally. So that call was so, oh, I just took that did deflate me. It was just very like, I just remember thinking that was such a broad brush. So like, what did I get out of that, right?
Which now today I diagnosed, but today it's one area can really show that you're impaired. So I was surprised that it sounds like, I don't know, maybe they were like and instead of or.
Well, and I think I honestly I don't think that neurologist was skilled in ADHD at all. It was
You know.
just
Yeah.
yeah, I think, for pretty much nearly everyone in that I on this weird path, all they had was a checklist. So that's why they treated me like a checklist. So, if you don't understand the nuances, that was the frustration when I talk about that broad brush. I'm like, if you ask me about these really specific things, I'm going to check them all off. But when the entry point is this very broad checklist, there's that huge gap between those two things. So, next step, talk to a psychiatrist. The psychiatrist told me that psych evaluations were not the way to get diagnosed and that the criteria are stupid. I'm like, well, thank you. Okay, great. And he said, go get a sleep study. He said, the first thing I want to do is,
What?
yeah, is to make sure that sleep isn't part of what's going on.
Okay.
And I do want to give a shout out for that
Yeah.
because it was a huge, huge part of the chain of events, the path, the puzzle piece clicking. I had suspected there were sleep problems, even though I would sleep 8 hours a night. I was always exhausted. I always kind of attributed it to that being driven like a motor.
Mm-hmm.
It was like I'm gonna go 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 until I crash, and then I'm gonna wake up and go go go. But I learned that there's absolutely I hate the word comorbidity,
I know. Occurring.
co-occurring, excellent, awesome. That sleep apnea is co-occurring with ADHD and also trauma. So I think sleep apnea has a lot of the bad stereotypes like ADHD where people don't really understand it. They think, oh, you're fat, you'll lose some weight, you'll get over it, or whatever, or that treatment is horrible. But it's far more common. It's incredibly easy to treat. And I had a mild case, which was my brain woke up every 4 minutes. Like no wonder my brain was exhausted. Yeah, yeah. And just a quick thing, as an aside, if anyone listening wakes up with headaches or wakes up with a really dry mouth or a sore throat, think about this as a possibility, because those are both cases where, you know, those are a couple signals that this might be something for them. So even though that initial interaction with that psychiatrist was frustrating, he did point me towards a really important piece. So I did find that was part of the equation. It was also part of my dad's equation, and he knew it but never got treatment. And I can't remember exactly where I heard about this, but the idea is that I love this metaphor that all throughout the day, your waking day, you got all these different things you're thinking and things you're doing, and your brain's creating cortisol and all these little chemicals and stuff, and it kind of creates debris. Like this idea that over the course of the day, you have this debris that's kind of built up in your brain, and that when you're in deep sleep, it's like sweeping up that debris, right? Isn't that great? And I was like, of course I have these difficulties getting going and focusing and all these things when that debris never gets cleaned up. So just, the shout out for that. This could be a component for some folks listening. And for me it was, and I was very thankful to get treatment. And it wasn't an overnight, change. It built over time. But now, even though I was getting real sleep, probably for the first time in my life, I still had some very real issues of not being able to get motivated until something was urgent, right? Or either being motivated by interest, challenge and interest. I think that one's Dodson. We're motivated by novelty, interest, challenge, and urgency.
Fun, yeah, and social and social
For sure, that
social
connection, for sure.
stuff.
I still had those issues of, well, if I was interested in it, I could hyper focus and do anything. If I'm not interested in it, holy hell, the only way I'm going to get going is when it's last minute. And the biggest consequence of that was that, I had to get to that point and then push myself so hard that I did crash. Like, I think a huge part of the chronic pain issues was there was no dialing in between, right? So while I had sleep, there was still something happening. So the next step was finding a new place that it was weird. I was trying to get a diagnosis. I ended up talking to a telehealth company that I thought was local. And they basically said, yeah, you sound like you have ADHD. We can't prescribe stimulants, because it was telehealth, which I appreciate that they have cracked down on, like, that being not an avenue, because it was probably too open of a door. But basically I tried a couple non-stimulants, didn't work, just bad side effects. The next step on the Mobius strip was to work with a therapist who specialized in ADHD. And he's like, look, you absolutely have it. I can't prescribe anything. What I do is I help people better understand what are the components of your particular flavor, right? And that was through learning about executive function, which I swear I'd heard those words before, but he basically said, gave me this wonderful self-assessment and said, you're going to find which ones you're bad at, which ones you're good at, and then we can go from there. And that was, the lightning bolt, the door opening, which was, oh, wait a second. Instead of, there's things I think for a lot of us, I shouldn't speak for anyone else but myself, but I think there's sort of that, when you have intention, when you have a desire to get something done and you don't, for whatever reason, if it's procrastination, distraction, 1,000 things, we learn that we can't trust ourselves, and we get disappointed in ourselves.
Yep.
And
Totally.
and then it becomes, no matter what's happening, it all kind of gets lumped into the same pile. What I loved about learning about executive function was, it wasn't that like everything's wrong with me. It's like, oh, wait a second. Not surprisingly, time blindness. My two worst in the buffet of executive function are time blindness and task initiation, like just getting frickin' started.
Yep.
The final stretch of getting a diagnosis where everything came back together was, I was working with the therapist, learning about executive functions, learned that all the visual thinking tools I had already done naturally was bridging the gaps in executive function. And then I saw my nurse practitioner who, a couple of years previous, had said Ferrari brain, quoted Ferrari brain with bicycle brakes. And I just have a regular old annual appointment with her. And she was looking at my records and she's seeing these non-stimulant medications that were in my chart. And it was so great. She's looking at it and she just goes, you need a stimulant, right? and I laughed, and I'm like, Exactly. So I said, well, yeah. And she goes, well, you have a diagnosis. And I said, well, actually, I don't. And I gave her like the shortest version of, the bits and pieces you've heard here, right? And bless her, the first person not to treat me like a checklist, we've had a relationship for years and she knows my chemistry, my anatomy, all the things. She goes, you know yourself. Do you want to try this? And that's how I got the freaking diagnosis after all of that. It was incredible.
And so I want to know what happened. Stimulant medication worked for you?
So
Lucky
happily,
you.
thankfully, right? So thankfully, she knew, and she's not an expert in ADHD, but she had, this is something she sees in her group of patients. She said, you know what? Let's start with Vyvanse. It seems to be because it's like I forget if it's like Ritalin or Adderall. Basically, it's like really structurally similar to one of those, but it has an amino acid that it releases more slowly
Yes,
and
exactly.
yeah. So she said, this is why I'm choosing this one. That made sense to me. We started an extremely low dose. And thankfully, we just went up one notch, two notch, and it was working. And I was feeling a difference. And for me, the biggest things were I didn't have three channels in my head at once. There was way less noise. For me, the kind of loops out, the kind of doom loops or doom scrolling or those patterns I'd get stuck in that were before task initiation, I would go through 2 cycles, not 20. For me, it was absolutely feeling that sense of I can actually, while still absolutely being myself, I could actually dial into something that wasn't quite 11 to recognize like, oh, okay, this is just truly just help with getting over the task initiation. Not having to start things at the very last minute was enormous. Not having to push my body at the very last minute because that was the only thing to get stuff done was enormous. So in that case, we went up to the second dosage and I said, I think I'm good here. And I said, I'd like to try the next dosage just to see. And she said, okay. And that was when I was too anxious. It was too much. I now am at this, this fairly low dosage. I also drink coffee, but it's a 1 part caffeine to 3 parts decaf mix. So I can have some caffeine that works with the medication.
Yeah.
And, I take it most days. And I know which days where I'm like, I don't take it on the days where I know I have something urgent or I know I have something interesting where I'm like, you know what? I'm not going to take it these days. Not that there's anything wrong with taking it. Honestly, it's just because it's hard to know that you're going to get a refill.
Yeah.
But I know that, okay, if I don't have these other ways that I'm going to have this motivation, I do have this medication. So thankfully, I am very thankful it's worked for me. The main consequence has been drying out my mouth. I appreciate you did talk to Jessica, the mosaic artist. You were talking about dental issues. That's actually the root of not tooth grinding, but because the medications make our mouths dry, it can have a big impact on our dental health. Absolutely. I was really concerned I'd have to like try everything under the sun until my dental hygienist said, Brandy, almost all mental health meds do that. That's just you can have a better functioning brain and then you just got to watch out for your dental health more. So just wanted to share that as a thing for folks to look out for. That is absolutely doable. That might be part of somebody's equation.
So let's talk about executive functions because we're right in the middle of the highway there. Okay, Brandy, since we're going headfirst into executive functions, what if you explain to our audience who may not know what executive functions are, what are you talking about?
Executive functions are, most people who have heard the phrase, they know it either from education and learning disabilities or from psychology and thinking disabilities. Unfortunately, it's usually in the realm of how our brain is not working. But executive functions are all that kind of higher level thinking we have to do that gets us from an idea all the way through to execution. It's all the types of thinking processes that happen in our prefrontal cortex, front of our brain, that get us from an intention all the way through the organization, the planning, the action, to having something done. Now, of course, that getting stuff done is pretty darn important, whether that's I need to, feed myself or I'm writing a book, it could be small things or big things, but ADHD is an executive dysfunction disorder, meaning that we have issues with the way that executive function portion of our brain works. And what I loved about that experience, the door that opened, that therapist opened, who was a specialist and understood what ADHD truly meant and had it himself, was that
Mm-hmm.
it isn't just capital E, capital F executive function. They are very specific functions. And when you know what they are, you can better understand what parts are working and what parts aren't. So, for example, one of the executive functions is task initiation, just getting started, right? That's when you're functioning. We all know when that's not functioning, it's procrastination. Like, so,
Right.
that's a very commonly, everyone knows what procrastination is, but how many of us have thought about, oh, wait a second, when it's working, it's task initiation, right? Like, what are the things that stop me from getting going? It could be that my issue with task initiation is I don't really understand what the first steps are, right? If you understand that's the issue, that one, one of your specific issues is task initiation, and two, that it's about not being clear on what the first steps are, you can find a solution, right?
Yeah.
Instead of it just
Mm-hmm.
being, oh, I always procrastinate, I suck,
Right.
which is
Right. Learned helplessness, paralysis, all of it. Yeah.
exactly, exactly. So that was such an amazing door opening, lightning bolt moment where it's like, oh, this is understandable. This is knowable. And in my particular, for this particular being over here, the two worst, like I said, time blindness. I've always struggled to make time make sense. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
and for me, I've learned how to build my life around either being on, being present, like teaching a virtual workshop with beautiful humans live with me, or being off, right? So just knowing that, like, and not designing anything to be around something like a weekly routine or a daily routine. I have a couple daily routines, but like just knowing
Yeah.
that time doesn't make sense in that way for me. So if I can
Right.
be 100% present, you're going to get the absolute best of me. But if we're going back and forth in email, forget it. Or back and forth in text, forget it. Right? That's a way of time
Yeah.
that's not making sense.
Ah, absolutely. Absolutely. Okay. So executive functions are all the skills we need to get things done, the planning, the scheduling, the time management, but emotion is part of that too, right? So I'm curious. You have been in visual facilitation for what, 2 decades? Um, have you discovered, and you're really well versed in executive functions, have you discovered, or do you think that there are different kinds of ADHD that end up, so we have different kind of traits and personalities based on the executive function skills that we might really struggle with versus the ones that we're really good at? because because you and I seem to share a lot of the, I mean, my I think my big thing is time. If you don't understand time, nothing makes sense. No wonder you're always late. We're in the moment, right? It's either now or not now. So I'm curious if you have any thoughts around that, because why is it that some of us can be like you and me? Is it you and me? You and I? You and me? Yeah, like you and me. I literally have to think that through in my head every time. Didn't used to have to do that. So they can be like us, where we're so driven and we're so, obviously when we're interested, we don't just take it to the next level. We take it 3 and 4 steps beyond that. And I will say that not everybody with ADHD is as action oriented as we are, but we have discovered, right, that when we're in action, we feel so much better. So next, right?
Totally. And for anyone listening to the podcast, I'm nodding very loudly as Tracy's describing that. And I said ooh when you said like different types of ADHD, and I think I love a good taxonomy, so maybe that's another thing I'm gonna
Yeah.
putter with. But I do think there is. I really appreciate you saying that because I think that for some folks, their form of ADHD feels like a whole lot of the emotional dysregulation and the impulsivity, right? That or the defiance. Like that can be
Mm-hmm.
like feel like a different kind of creature than I can't speak for you, Tracy, but I know that when I do get started and I'm in hyperfocus, I forget I have a physical body. And I truly get high when I'm working. Like when I am in flow state, when I am in the zone, I don't feel pain. I am the happiest clam you've ever met. Like just super, super, like just blissed out. And because that overdrive is shutting down my ability to remember to drink water and go to the bathroom and feed myself, that there is a consequence there, right? It's like, as much as I can love that, there's going to be this physical toll. So that could be a different kind, right? A different type or flavor of ADHD that, we can relate to. And I shouldn't speak that you feel all those specifically, but
I no, I do. Literally, I mean, I forget to eat, I forget to drink water, I forget to pick up my kids from school, like all of it, because I'm in.
that's it, exactly. Yeah, and when people talk about flow state, basically, where folks found the most satisfaction in their lives, and it was that sense of being. And in his research, one of the biggest things was being in flow state, feeling like you're completely in the zone. And a lot of us know what that feels like happily. A lot of us have found our things that bring us that flow state: crafting, sport, social interaction, all these different things that can be, right? And most of us know when we're in that state, time loses meaning. And when we are in flow state, like, it's like, oh, that's great. I went to another place. I did all this amazing work or had this amazing experience because we were on, present. It's now. We're in the moment, which is brilliant. Brilliant for how we're able to feel that sense of purpose and make meaning and all these wonderful things. And I think for those of us who do have that flavor of ADHD, it's like, well, what's the problem? Right? Yes, we have consequences where it's like you're so in your zone that, oh, wait a second, my kids need to be picked up.
Yeah.
Oh, wait a second,
Yeah.
like my blood sugar is plummeted and I'm shaking. It's like whatever those versions are for you. But I can appreciate.
And I'm really mean.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Hangry. I love when I learned the word hangry. I'm like, that's it.
Oh, yeah, me too.
Totally. So that was, I mean, my experience with him, this therapist who specialized in ADHD, was like such a, again, it was one of those moments where it's like, I didn't have a diagnosis yet, really formally, and I didn't have access to trying a medication, which I was interested in trying to do. But I had this new depth of understanding of what our brain needs to do and when it works and when it doesn't work. And that's why understanding what the executive functions were was just completely eye-opening. That's why I love teaching it now, because I think there's so many of us who, whether we have ADHD, have autism, whether we're just simply high achievers who are go, go, go and burning out, whether we have trauma and our trauma response is hyper productivity, like all these different things. Or it doesn't have to be, I mean, I'm talking about my kind of people, which tend to be go, go, go.
Yeah.
All of that, no matter what direction we're coming at, every single one of us humans have ways our brains work better and ways our brains work less well. And hopefully we understand what contributes to those things. Like if I do sleep poorly, I'm not going to think clearly the next day. I remember my college friend who we lived together our senior year recently said, yeah, I got kind of concerned about you because you were working on an art exhibit and you were living on Kool-Aid. It's like I was making art and drinking Kool-Aid and that was it. And I was like, yeah, that doesn't sound great. But
No, absolutely not. Corn syrup.
right, exactly. And this is an aside that could be a whole nother episode. For me, the one thing I thought was absolutely impossible that I've done and had the absolute largest impact on my health was cutting out sugar. So I'm just going to plant that seed there and leave it there. Yeah, incredible. And when we tell, I don't know if this is true for you, Tracy, but when I tell people that, I get treated like the vegan who's telling you not to eat meat. And it's like, you're like you can see somebody glaze over, like, don't tell me I can't eat sugar. You're a monster. I'm like, okay, just that, but huge.
And the thing is, though, Brandy, as we get older, I mean, I was a sugar-aholic. I would literally go on a business trip. I still remember this as a lawyer. And I would, go out for dinner with the other lawyers afterwards. We'd be on depositions or something somewhere else in the country. And I would literally not order an entree. I would order an appetizer and 3 desserts. And then I would kind of pick between all 3, but I would easily eat 2, right? I could do that. I can't do it anymore. It so affects my cognition, my focus, and just how I feel. Like I think anxiety, it makes me, yeah, it affects my mood. Can't do it anymore. So I am curious, how do we connect what you do that you do at such a high level, visual facilitation? I feel like we're talking like the post-it notes all over the place, and then we're going to kind of put it all together, right? This is how our brains work. So, how do we connect the visual facilitation with the executive functions? And then how do we go from that so that our listeners get something that they can think about that maybe they can try that might work for them?
I love that segue. That was beautiful, Tracy. Thank you. What was happening when I was meeting with the therapist, his name is Craig, uh, every suggestion he had, I'm like, oh yeah, uh-huh. You're talking about the problem solving, the optimism, the like, okay, this isn't working, how do we fix it? It turned out that he was brilliant, he was fantastic, and basically a ringer had walked into his office because I had already figured out all these tools that help me make up for those gaps, right? Those places where my brain didn't function as well. And all of it came down to making what was one was getting what was in my head out, that fast brain, right? Talking about post-it notes. Truly, my entire life, that fast brain, the imagination, the thinking, the problem solving, the everything always got like poured out of my brain onto a piece of paper. And that looked different ways at different times for different things that need to get done. But that was fundamentally, it was just the getting stuff out because I think most of us are trying to hold way too much inside of us. And we have far too high expectations of what we can carry and hold. And it's just not human. It's just not kind. So one is just getting the stuff out.
I get crap all the time, but I swear by this. Our brains are not meant to remember. Our brains are meant to think. And we can't think if we're trying to cram all the remember stuff, right? In there, keep it in there.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'll add to that. We are not meant to know what's happening everywhere in the world all the time to everyone.
Yeah. But we have social media, so, sort of.
Right. Yeah. Well, but that sets up the expectation we're supposed to do that, and that's not human either. So, yeah, so the first thing was just getting stuff out, right? Like that. And for me, one of my absolute biggest, I would personally don't describe this as anxiety, but overwhelm. Like I would, my brain be going so fast, I get so many ideas, and I go, and it'd be great until it wasn't, right? Until like it just tipped over to overwhelm. So a lot of my tools that I had used, the getting stuff out onto paper, was trying to manage that overwhelm, like having a place for all this stuff to go. And sometimes that was ideas, sometimes that was emotions, sometimes that was just I'm trying to, sometimes it's like a really concrete plan, like I'm designing something, right? Could be all sorts of things, but it always had that outlet. So I think number one, the most important thing is don't expect ourselves to carry all this stuff around, to have this outlet for ourselves. And the next was that I think it's just that relief of getting it out. But I think what has always worked for me and why I love teaching this is, aside from just the release and the relief, is we're making all these things tangible. We're making our ideas physical and we're making our ideas spatial. So there's a sense of moving, pushing pieces around.
Well, so Brandy, the reason I'm so fascinated by what you do is because I had all these. So, what happens to me is I get lost in words. And so if I have an outline, it means nothing to me. So if I've got an interview or whatever and there's an outline, I get caught up in all those words. And so I realized that if I could have a way to draw what it was that was in my head, and there would be one image that would signify this concept and another image that would signify that concept. When people would ask me my origin story, how did I end up with, becoming an ADHD coach and writing a book on ADHD and having this podcast, I literally, like if I would have written it out in words, I couldn't have. So I did this little graph.
Brilliant. Look at
And
that.
it's literally a little map that looks like, what does that look like?
Like a game
How do you
board. It's
describe it?
kind of like a game board with different moments in thought bubbles.
Yeah, that's on a path, right? But it kind of snakes up around to the top of the path. if I could have this, I couldn't even remember my own story. That's what was so ridiculous because if there was even a little bit of anxiety or overwhelm, as you call it, my prefrontal cortex would shut down. So I started to make these little like picture things so that I could remember what happened first, second, and third. My problem is ordering my brain, right? It all just gamush together. So what I realized is if I could learn how to do that, I think it would really help me. And I did it because I got a book deal and I knew I was going to have to start talking about the book. This was 2 years before. And so I had to figure out a way that I could capture what I was thinking and be able to just look at one, I don't know, this is an 8.5 by 11 piece of paper, and I laminate them and I put them all in color. And that is literally how I explain everything. And so I that's how my brain works. That is what worked for me. So yeah, I don't think I hope I would never pan visual spatial because it's the only way I function.
Absolutely, absolutely. And this is just, a quick reference that I picked up on. And I love, I mean, what you showed for folks who are listening, it was like this game board that kind of had an S shape and there were different moments. And like you said, you were putting things in order. You were organizing your thoughts. And I think that I can appreciate what you're saying about words, 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 and them mushing together. Or like just, I always think of that as kind of fuzzing out, right? And even in that
Yeah.
drawing you showed, there are words in it and they're
Yeah.
succinct, right? You've distilled down a point. And what's so important is they are spatially related in the right order to tell that story. And I'm sure the other kinds of drawings you were making that helped the book be made and be out in the world and helping so many people, that those drawings were about how do I organize my thoughts? How do these pieces fit
Yes.
together?
Yes. Yeah, like time blindness. So if a reporter calls me and says, I want to talk to you about time blindness, I will literally, kind of like you show on your TED Talk, I will organize everything with cards or post it notes. And what I love about it is I can throw all my thoughts out there, right? And then I can move them around. And if it's in the case of post it notes, which is what I typically use, I have a blank white wall. I will literally organize them and it's right in my dining room. And I have to walk through my dining room, to get to the great room every single day, a million times. I will organize it on that wall. And then I can go back and forth and I can change things. But it's all that stuff in our brain that gets all, it's like, I think of it as spaghetti, right? We're just all tangled up and trying to simplify it and put it in a system that makes not chronic sense, chronological sense.
Totally, totally.
So what you're telling me, Brandy, is this is a thing.
Yes, it is a thing. Absolutely.
And a lot of our brains work like this.
They do. And, if anyone watches my TEDx talk, which is called Shape Your Thinking, look for that. Search my name on YouTube, you'll find the TEDx talk. I was quoting a child psychologist who studied kids, and I know of any educators out there, there's a lot of people beating up on learning styles. And that's a whole nother episode for a different day. Maybe you even talk to somebody about this. There are those of us who are wired differently than other people in, I love this word neurotype, that people can have different neurotypes. So it's not function or dysfunction. It's just, this is the way I'm wired versus this is how you and I are wired very similarly, but might be wired differently than other people. So Linda Kreger Silverman, who I quote in the TEDx talk, in her research, 63% of us, the kids she studied, thousands of kids she studied, lean towards or were strongly visual spatial. The ones who are the kind of students who kind of see everything at once, right? Ask them to show their work, they can't. Like, it's just like, it just arrives fully
Yes.
formed, right? They're the ones who find the connections between things. They see the patterns. All those things that are in between the facts and the figures and the kind of stuff that education systems unfortunately are usually built around. So 37% of people, of these kids, were auditory sequential. So 63% of us are visual spatial, kind of folks listening to us right now who are like, you're speaking my language. 37% are the ones who are auditory and sequential, step by step, detail focused, what education systems and workplaces are built around. So
Yeah.
There's absolutely nothing wrong with us. We are just raised in systems that aren't built for all this brilliance. I love that you use the word brilliant. I use the word brilliant. All this brilliance that is about that bigger picture, which is about how the pieces fit together. They're the ways our brains already work. We just don't know the tools that are going to help us get that stuff out. That's why I teach what I teach. That's why I'm so happy to be talking to you, and always happy to talk to folks about this, because these are very learnable skills that help us be us in the most brilliant ways.
You you said something incredible. So our kind of brains see everything at once. Oh my gosh, this totally describes my son who would get, he's like gifted in math, but he would like flunk math classes because he could not show his work. So what is it about our brains? Are we just so brilliant that we just get it and it's intuition and we don't even know why we get it? We can't explain it. It's just magic.
I think that and so much more. I think that there's, I recently learned, I was talking to a woman about, I'm not, we were talking about left brain versus right brain, and I'm not a huge fan of that mental model because it divides us literally. And people say, I'm this or I'm this, so I'm
Yeah.
incapable of this thing or that thing.
Right.
And I believe, let me see if I am left-handed. So, your left hand is connected to the right side of your brain. She was telling me that literally the right side of the brain, broadly speaking, is designed for the connections, is designed for the patterns, is the making these weird connections that are hard to explain. And that's about as much as I
Yeah.
can say about it, because I'm kind of talking secondhand. But it truly, and again, that isn't to say that somebody is this or that, because we are whole human beings with both sides of all sides of our brains, all parts of our bodies, as ways of making meaning. So I don't even like to go too far into that, but it is truly when I do think it is about being the ways in which we are hyper perceptive. And that can mean a whole lot of different things. It can be the sensory stuff where we're able to take in so much information. And side note, anyone who grew up in difficult circumstances with trauma and had to be hyper vigilant had to
Yeah.
have all of those channels open to stay safe,
Right.
right? And often those two things overlap. That we're I think every one of us are meaning making machines. That's my belief. And our ways of making meaning very often have a whole heck of a lot to do with our our ability to perceive things other people don't notice or don't see, which seems kind of woo woo and weird, but is absolutely because we're so tuned in. And we often are people who are far more tuned into our intuition. It's that gut, right? Where it's just like, well, how do you know that? Like, I know it because I know it. I know it because I feel it, right? So then because it's so internal and intuitive and it feels like what we know in our bones, how the frick do we describe that to somebody else?
Yeah. Especially to a society that wants facts, figures, numbers, right? Statistics.
Exactly. 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 So it's that my experience is absolutely real, and the struggle is, how do I put this in a medium that you're going to understand? And I think that's why so many of us, when we find our people, it very much becomes, I found my people. Enough, like, let's just set aside the people who don't get it, right? Like, why struggle with putting into words something that is truly experiential or is ineffable? Like, you can't put words to it, but it's still real. It's still things you absolutely know. And, instead of fighting against the people who are like, your son, show your
Right.
proof, right? Write up the steps of your proof, show your work. It's like, well, I could try to do this thing I'm not built to do. Or when I find my peeps, I find my
Mhm.
peeps. Right? I think I think that's why a lot of us, when we find the folks who understand us, it's like those deep friendships. But one of the biggest things is when we find our like-minded people, we don't have to deal with any of the stupid old small talk. We just go deep really
Absolutely.
fast.
And for those who are sitting there thinking, oh my God, this is so woo woo, and no, it really isn't. If you cannot rely on your brain, if you don't know when your brain is actually going to show up and do the things you need it to do, if you don't understand your brain, because you don't understand what it's brilliant at and what it's not so great at, of course you'd start relying on your intuition and building your intuition. Like, it makes perfect sense to me.
Exactly. Exactly.
Okay, so what are the skills? Tell us, what do we do if we're actually really resonating with what it is that you're saying?
Absolutely. The so the imperfect term, kind of the best term we have right now is called visual thinking. And it's just what I like to describe it as, well, first, it's an imperfect term because it isn't just about, when we say visual, you think pictures. And I so appreciate that as you described your frustration with words, you kind of swung the pendulum over to, well, what are the images that make sense
Yeah.
to me, right?
It's almost like they're in a box, right? All of the thoughts. And so if I see that image, it unlocks that box. Does that make sense?
Brilliant. Yeah, totally. It's access. It's how do I access what I know is true, but struggle to figure out how to represent it, right? So the reason I think it's visual thinking is imperfect or incomplete is it is visual. It's also spatial. It is the fact that you have all those sticky notes up and you're able to move them around,
Yeah.
right? It's having tools that are not carved in stone or even ink on paper. It's like I can move this stuff around. This isn't set yet. This is messy right now. I don't know the order of my thoughts yet, but I'm using the tools of sticky notes or index cards or whatever you use. Whiteboard, right? Write something on whiteboard, wipe it up, wipe it away, and write again. All of these are using physical tools that help us in that flow state, in that sense of in the space of figuring stuff out. So I think that tangibility, the fact that it's tangible, it's physical, you're holding on to things, you can move things around. The fact that it's spatial, you can line things up when they need to be in a sequence. You can cluster things together when you say, I don't know what to call this grouping of sticky notes yet, but I know they're similar to each other, right? So there's all these ways we're making our thinking physical, tangible, visual, spatial, all that good stuff. And just generally, I like to think of visual thinking as writing with more choices because when we're writing, we talked about that outline, right? We're forced into a system that is only words and it's from left to right
Yeah.
and top to bottom. And if that's not the way your brain makes connections, or you get down, like I always like to say, I can write a list and I'll write a list and write a list and write a list. And then like one too many items on that list, boom, I'm in overwhelm. It's just like, it's a structure that doesn't work well for me. And I'll happy to tell you my counterpoint to that in a moment. But the when you have more choices with visual thinking, it's I have this thought in my head and okay, what is the thought I want to capture? How do I want to distill it down? So I don't have to write two sentences. I can just capture that thought, becomes that memory. It does help you bridge those gaps in memory. You're just like, okay, now I've got this idea distilled down to a couple words. Now, where do I want it to go on this piece of paper? Now, one thing is, I don't work with lined paper, blank sheets of paper, and I turn them 90 degrees. So already with landscape, where you have your piece of paper in landscape, like your picture that you held up with that
Uh-huh.
game board, with the thought bubbles
Yeah.
of your origin, we instantly shift our thinking. So then it's like, okay, where does this idea go? Now we have more choices. Is it connected to something else that's already on that piece of paper? Is it something new and should be separate from something that's already on that piece of paper? We have choices in, is it a certain color? It could be a certain color because that expresses something about that particular point. It could be color coded, like everything on this piece of paper is red because I've got the blue drawing elsewhere for a whole nother reason. It can be a certain size, like, okay, this idea is the really big idea. So all of those choices are super duper duper learnable. And when we know how those choices we have to make, we've just given ourselves all these incredible tools to get the stuff out, to push stuff around, to visually, tangibly make represent those patterns we're already making in our brain, to represent those connections we're already making in our brain. All those brilliant things our brains are, many of our brains, talking for the particular kind of type of ADHD who's like nodding loudly while they're listening to us, right? That those are tools that help us represent all those brilliant things that are happening on that sticky note or on that piece of paper.
And
Entirely
and
learnable.
well, you stop me if I'm wrong, but I don't think I'm wrong. This is such an individual thing. We are creatures of specificity. So I don't know about you, but like my paper has to be this certain kind of thick, I don't know what those boards are that you buy, those art boards, Swarthmore, right? It's that really thick paper. And I have these German pens that you fill from the back. And like it just and then the ones for the black outline, it has to be a certain one. Exactly, those pens. What are those called?
It's a German company called Neuland.
Yeah, love them. Love them, except for don't overfill them, which I've done. And then they are everywhere. So we're such creatures of specificity that it has to be perfect for our brains, and then only certain things work for our brains. So the only way, Brandy, you tell me if I'm wrong, is you kind of have to test it and see what works for you. Yeah?
Absolutely. No, I love how you're describing the paper and the markers, and I think that gets to the sensory thing, right?
Yeah.
If the sensory stuff doesn't feel yummy,
Won't do it.
oh, it's just not going to work. Exactly, it's not going to work. So, when Tracy was describing that pen, I knew exactly what it was. I had them and held one up. But for me, I'm holding up a big container of Papermate flares. The way this kind of felt pen hits an index card or a piece of paper is that's I'm in my zone. Like immediately I'm in that zone of like now I can get some work done.
Okay, well, I just wrote that down. I've got to try those. So, can I ask you? So, I tend to work with post-it notes, but I do have index cards as well. What do you, and because, they're thick and there's more space to write on them. But what I don't like about them is they're not sticky. So, what do you normally use? Okay, let's say you have to do a presentation or you have to write something. What is your process? Because I will tell you, Brandy, the hardest thing in the whole world for me was writing that book. I really thought I would come out of it and just feel so accomplished but I'm still not sure how I did it. It was so hard.
I'll absolutely answer your question. I want to ask you two questions about the book writing process and
Yeah.
to see if we're similar in this way. One is, well, okay, just it's not a question now, but one of the biggest challenges I find with writing books, and happily I've written a couple of them, is a book is inherently sequential
So,
because
yeah.
right? Pages are in a specific order. So it's very hard to figure out how to break down the complex things you're writing about, because I know your topic is as complex as my topics have been. So it's so hard to figure out, okay, how do I break this down and get them in a specific order?
Well, it's kind of like what you said before. I can't explain the steps, right? I know it in my head. You make me go into the writing and it's just so painful and slow. And so just figure it out. So, and then it makes no sense, right? Because it's just so hard to get out what's in my brain on the paper and have it in order and, make sure that when people read it, they understand, oh, this came first and this came second, and I'm not all over the place.
Totally. And I appreciate when you said that's like, for anyone who's listening, Tracy's like her shoulders are up to her ears and she's like clearly like that tension, like the physical, like you feel it. I describe that when I want to crawl out of my skin. It's part of a process where you're like, this is so uncomfortable. And, you talk about that optimism or that problem solving or whatever my wiring is. I always go like, you know what, this is really uncomfortable and I'm going to get past it.
Yeah.
Like this is temporary, right? So the second thing that came to mind as you're describing the book writing is, and I gotta think this is you too, because so many times across episodes, you'll reference basically if I have a context, if I understand the context of something, I can fit a whole lot of things in that, right? You're always making that reference, and every time you do, I'm nodding, as I'm listening. And I think, when it comes to creating something as big as and difficult and important and impactful as a book, for me, there's a whole lot of that tension until I can figure out the shape of it. Like I can figure out like, oh, here we go. This is the bigger context I'm working with. And before that happens, there is a lot of tension and pushing stuff around and just getting stuff out. And I'll definitely talk about post-it notes and index cards. And once it clicks and you go, oh, wait a second, this is the shape. This is kind of the areas I need to cover in this book. And here's what each of these chapters need to do. Then it's like, oh, well, there you go. now it's a breeze. Now it's, maybe you didn't feel that way specifically, but does that resonate with your experience?
Um, Absolutely. Because what I was doing before was just like I would do a chapter on this or a chapter on that. And I thought that, oh, I could just take the podcast. Like I've covered everything about ADHD, in each of these podcasts and pull the best podcasts and kind of put those in order. And that's where I started. But then I realized that no, you don't have that much time. And how our brains are, everything feels important. And so it was so difficult to figure out what do you cut, what don't you cut. Obviously, that's what you have an editor for. But then part of me was like, wait, but I'm cheating if I'm not doing it all by myself. Like all of this swirling around, at the same time.
Yeah. And I think, your description of not knowing, what's most important and knowing there's constraints, that's
Hmm.
prioritization. That is that's part of organization as an executive function. And I can be organized 6 ways to Sunday, but prioritization, I'm completely with you. That
Yeah.
is a struggle in my brain, right?
Yeah.
And that's why you do need an editor. That's why you shouldn't or can't do it on your own. Not that you aren't incredibly capable. It just happens that hits exactly one of those executive functions that
Mm.
just isn't how you're wired.
That's so fascinating, Brandy, because I am so hyper organized. And I think I am, like if I'm going to cook a meal for people, oh my gosh, I've got all the lists, I've got everything. I shop well in advance, I do all the preparation. But then when it comes to that last like hour before people are supposed to eat, friggin' hell, I don't know what I'm supposed to do. I'll literally sit in the kitchen and I'll just spin. And so then it's like my husband, like, that I can't do this. You need to tell me what comes in, when. And my son was telling me those new Apple goggles, you can literally cook with them on and you look at the thing, it'll tell you, take that out. Look out and look at the other pot and it'll say, this needs 5 more. Like it will literally tell you what to do. I'm like, Marcus, I don't care if it's $4,000. I need that.
Okay, I might have a much cheaper solution.
Okay, let's hear it.
Do you ever use the post-it notes in the kitchen?
Yes, I use them, but I have a feeling I don't use them the way I'm supposed to use them. Because what I'll do is I'll write a bunch of notes on a post-it note, but it tends to be the bigger ones. And then again, it's all writing. So no. Okay, tell me what I do.
Okay, so I love this. This is like real time, real time problem solving. So I think, and this gets to your question about index cards or post-it notes or like what works.
Okay.
Broadly speaking, different materials, different tools work for different things at different times. There is never ever one solution. So many of us were like, what is that next workshop or what is that next online course or what is that next physical, tool, that planner, right? How many people raise your hand if you have, tried a dozen planners at least, right?
Yeah.
And none of those planners, none of those objects are are going to work for every single thing. And by the way, those of us who need novelty, it's going to wear off and we're going to have to try something. We're going to want something new. Upshot. Sometimes index cards are useful, sometimes sticky notes are useful. In your description, you're using those bigger sticky notes with a whole lot of words, which is great for one part of that process, right? That works earlier in the process. All you need to do is get, whether it's smaller sticky notes or you just write fewer words on the bigger sticky notes, right? Like you just make your writing bigger and fewer
Yeah.
words, then it's like, then it's, if you can understand that in those moments, that last hour when you're spinning and you're just like like not a good kind of overdrive, right? It's just overwhelm, chaotic. If you've noticed that there's certain patterns, like, oh, the thing I always get hung up on is what is the timing where things need to come out of the oven?
Uh-huh. And when they need to go in.
That's it, right?
And then I have a cocktail and I don't give a crap anymore.
Totally.
And then it's a bigger mess.
Totally. And if, like you've already mentioned, like loving socializing, if people are coming over and you're like, everything has to be perfect, and then I get to have the fun I want to have, right? That's a whole nother layer of
I
it.
don't need dinner.
Right. Totally. I think that it could be just that those larger post-it notes with more words worked for a certain part of that process. And then simply, if you can anticipate, if these are the things that hang you up, then it's like, it could be literally printing out, I was going to say sticky notes that just say when things go in and when things go out.
Mm-hmm.
But, I know you've got a time timer on the shelf behind you. I always have a time timer.
Mm-hmm.
It could be adding like tags, like you'd have to work backwards and do the math, but you could actually make like little notes, and they have larger time
Oh
timers.
my God,
But,
Brandy.
right?
Oh my gosh, because that's my problem. I see the time on a post-it note and it doesn't really mean anything to me. Versus if I saw how it was all connected. Ah,
That's it. Yeah. See, it's
wow.
just finding the right tool. It's just finding, and in that, you are making that task which you've been trying to hold in your head when everything's happening at once and you have that cocktail and people are arriving, right?
Yeah.
It's just thinking ahead and going, you know what? I know I'm not going to be able to hold on to this. So how am I making it physical? How am I making it visible? Like in this case, like you said, you can have that time written down, but you don't necessarily understand that number in the context of being in that room, which is why we love time timers. It shows us how much of an hour is left, right?
Mm-hmm.
It could be literally you draw something out, and this, I know this sounds elementary, but it works, and it's why you teach kids how to tell time. You could have if you have a clock, if you have a actual clock with hands, you do the version with digital too, but if you have a clock with hands in your kitchen, you can make a diagram that's like when the hands are here, this happens. When the hands are here, this happens.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And somebody might say, what's wrong with me? Why would I need that? Like, what's wrong with needing that? Right?
Yeah.
Like, I think there's tools that we think are kind of like little kiddish or whatever, but it's like, if you know that's what your brain needs and you're able to do that for yourself, that is a win. That's fantastic. And if you have to, and delegating, I appreciate when your husband said you have to tell me what to do. Alongside prioritization, delegation is feels impossible to me.
Just do it. Read my mind.
It could be, let's you have a sticky note for him saying, okay, at this time do this. I have you heard about it in the TEDx talk. I talk about having a tangible to-do list. And one of the wonderful humans in my community, Andrea, she has a tangible to-do list on the back of her office door. And so this is if anyone watches, go ahead and watch the TEDx talk. This will make a lot more sense. Mm-hmm. But basically, you're breaking down tasks and putting each task on a sticky note, and putting it like there's a certain spatial arrangement that makes a heck of a lot of sense, and helps you from being overwhelmed. Well, what's brilliant in her household is one, that tangible to-do list on the back of the office door, the inside of her office door, helps keep her on track. She can open the door and make it disappear when she doesn't need to look at it. And her husband knows he uses it to go in and see how much is on Andrea's plate right now. And he can literally look at that tangible to-do list and say, oh, can I do this for you? Or maybe it's even just, wow, she's got a lot going on. Let me make sure our son is okay and fed and all this good stuff so she can stay in her zone and work more. And all of that is simply about breaking down, making the ways we work tangible and visible and spatial. And this gets perfectly to that point, your question about sticky notes or index cards. It's sort of all of the above, right? There's certain times, like right now I've got a tangible pointing over to the part of my studio space where I have the tangible to-do list. I use those when I am overwhelmed and I know it's the right tool for that job. And I don't do it all the time. I use that tool when I need it. When I wrote my TEDx talk, or when I wrote the books, and basically anything complex I've written always started out with index cards.
Okay.
And that just happened because I like being able to carry them around. In that case, I like that they're not sticky. And I always say, using index cards, each book started with I still have the stacks of index cards that became each of the books. And in all of these cases, when you have your sticky notes in that space you're walking by all the time, when I have my tangible to-do list, when Andrea has her tangible to-do list, when I'm writing things down on the index cards, the principle that's happening across all of those is we're making our thinking modular. We're separating our thinking into discrete pieces. So I learned, like I mentioned earlier, if I make a list, it works until it doesn't, right? It works until there's one too many things on that list. Mm-hmm. So I learned that if I put each of the things I need to do on an index card, Every one of those tasks has a place to be, and you can already tell where I'm going with this. But once I have everything on its own index card or sticky note, then all I need to do is grab the very next thing. Or I can separate out the things that are overwhelming me. So I'm able to shuffle things around and sequence things. So I'm not looking at one giant list that immediately the second I look at it, my energy drops out of my feet and I feel like a failure. It's like, no, yeah, all those things still need to be done, and each one of those things has its own card. So they have a place to live. That's that sense of relief, right? There's a place for this to be. And right now, I can look at that whole stack of index cards and go, right now, I'm going to group all of these 4 things together because they're all at my computer, right? Or I have 45 minutes, so I'm going to pull out this particular card because that's the time I have to focus on this task. But because it's modular, because it's not all in one big list, because you can physically move stuff around, like you already described in what you do with that wall, that's what's helping us stay in that moment doing the very next thing that needs to be done and not letting that super fast brain that's turned up to 11 get so overwhelmed. It just lets us have that place for everything to live and then just pull out what the very next thing is.
And you're focusing on only one thing instead of seeing that one to do in the sea of this whole list. That is brilliant. And, as you're talking, I've realized that when I get really overwhelmed, I have my own planning system that is, again, really simple. It's one card for the whole week. That's literally all I have to look at. But when I get really overwhelmed, I will take post-it notes and I will put one of the tasks on each post-it note, and then I'll have them all here on my on my desktop, and I will start going through them and I'll look and see, okay, what's the easiest thing that I can knock off? And so it's building the pile of done to, post-it notes that motivates me to keep going. So this is fascinating. So explain to us, you keep talking about this tangible to-do list, and you were talking about Andrea, I think, who has it on the back of her door. What does that look like? Is it a whiteboard? Is it, a big giant post-it note, which I friggin' love those big giant post-it notes to get my thoughts out into big, huge.
Totally. Awesome. Awesome. Yeah, and I'm realizing because we're in an auditory medium, I will make a page my site is loosetooth.com. It'll be loosetooth.com/smartass.
Okay.
Smartass, all one word. And I'll put information about the tangible to-do list so people can see what we're talking about. And I'm sure I'll pick up other really great visuals that'll help people understand, will supplement what we've just been talking about.
Wonderful.
A tangible to-do list is exactly what you just described. It happens that it's the same basic function. It's having a piece of a wall, and you can make mobile versions on pieces of paper with smaller sticky notes, but generally it's choosing an area in a room. When I described it in my book, The Idea Shapers, it's on the back of a door. Andrea put hers on the back of a door. Think about about that much space. But the point is, one is the discipline, the function, the learning how to put one task per sticky note. And that's not terribly hard to do, but sometimes you'll realize I don't know if this should be 3 sticky notes or 1 sticky note. And you'll figure that out, right? But you're putting a discrete action on its own sticky note. And then the shape of it is, so one is just breaking things out, making it modular, so it's movable, it's less overwhelming, you feel that relief that everything has a place for it to be. The second thing is that when I set it up, I split whatever that area is into 3 spaces. The first thing is a horizontal band across the top that is only 1 sticky note high. It's a limited amount of space. And that is the space where you pull out of all the sticky notes in the second area, which is kind of like the holding pen of everything. So you have a big part of that area that is just open and has everything. And, I love color coding things by projects. There's a lot of good things you can do to help clarify your thinking by how you draw those sticky notes. But basically, you got the holding pen with everything, the corral, right? And that band of space at the top, which is only 1 sticky note high, limits the space, and you decide what exactly needs to be pulled out of that corral and put in that row in order. And you can't put 17 things, right? So that active space at the top is where you know exactly what needs to happen next. All you need to do is grab the very next sticky note. And part of the reason I like this and what you were saying with your desk is it's tangible. I literally hold the sticky note and I put it on the edge of my monitor if I'm working at the computer. I put it next to the wall if I'm somewhere else. Like it is that visual reminder that this is what you're here to do. I was going to swear at myself. And, like that's your visual reminder. And then the third space, which you perfectly described, which is having that pile of stuff that's been done. The third space, and the way I set it up is it's a vertical space off to the side, is we don't crumple up the sticky notes and throw them away. You have the physical cue, even that tiny little moment of celebration for those of us who are always thinking about the next thing. I cross out the task in a gray ink so I can actually see the task underneath it, whatever, it's getting, specific. But like basically I X out that task is done, and then that finished task gets stacked up along that edge. So there's that sense of accomplishment. They don't disappear off the wall. They just like accumulate. So you can go like, even though I might have a whole lot of things over here in the corral, in the big area, and I know exactly what the next thing is across the top, I also have that space that shows me all the things I've gotten done. And
Wow.
we need that. We need that encouragement.
Well, and the beauty of this is, I'm sure you can relate where you're working on one thing and then all of a sudden you get distracted and suddenly you're down that rabbit hole and you totally forget what you were even supposed to be working on. Versus this is it's so specific. It's the one thing, right? The one thing. And it's challenging and it also sounds like it's kind of fun.
Yeah, I think so. And for me, part of the reason I don't have a permanent to-do list up is that two things. One is, and this really ties into our need for novelty, the need for newness, is that one, I don't have it up permanently because if it's up permanently, I'll fuzz it out. It'll just become wallpaper. It doesn't mean anything anymore.
Yeah.
So for me, I build one when I need it for a discrete amount of time, when I might be juggling a couple different projects or I have a specific deadline I'm freaking out about, right? And
Yeah.
you're nodding. You know what I'm talking about. And when I'm done, I take it down. I need that fresh start. The other thing, which I think you heard when I described Andrea's, is I find it really useful to have that tangible to-do list. I think about where it's placed in my field of vision. So I love the back of a door because you can open that door and not see it, right? So that's a way of making it disappear. And then you can close the door when you have the door closed and you're focusing, right? I personally would never, ever, ever put a tangible to-do list on the wall behind my monitor because it's there all the time. I want to be able to stop and decide to look at the tangible to-do list, to walk over to a different room to look at the tangible to-do list because I'm getting that transition point. I'm getting that physical shift in my body and where I'm at, and I'm choosing to go up to that tangible to-do list and pulling off the very next thing, or adding 5 more sticky notes I've decided need to be added, or Xing out the one that just got done. So it's those choices that are, I love that you talked about, the Swarthmore paper and the specific kind of pen. Like it's the same thing where you're recognizing the pleasure and the satisfaction of, I walk up to this tool that I've built for myself that works with my brain, not against it. And I know how it works and I can add to it and I can take things away and I can move things around. And I like how these colors look and the color coding fits and feels good. And I've got the pen I like to cross out the done with. And I love that walking up and putting that done task in its spot. And all of that is it just feels good and is working with us, not against us.
Yeah, and for those who are listening who are thinking, oh my gosh, nothing ever works for me. The deal is that, we know through neuroplasticity and we know through personal experience, I've heard this over and over again. If you figure out the system that works for you and you are successful, you are going to train your brain how to use this on a regular basis so you can get shit done, right?
Exactly. Exactly. And, I think this threads through so many things, and I don't think we've said it. Can't remember if we said it. I said it out loud, but so much of I think of problem solving, accepting ourselves, loving who we are, just moving through the world is being comfortable with being uncomfortable.
Yeah.
To know that there are times this isn't going to feel great. And I think so many folks, as soon as something feels uncomfortable, they're like, danger, danger. This is, now granted, when you're talking about something going against your gut or something that's
Yeah.
dangerous, truly dangerous, that's something separate.
Hmm.
That is very important information. But I think a whole lot of us, especially when we are the high achievers, the fast brains, we are really good at certain things. As soon as we're not good at something,
Yeah.
it's like, oh, this is the, I know, I like being good at stuff. This is like, this is, no, I'm not instantly succeeding at this thing I've never done before.
Hmm.
Therefore, I should stop. It's like, no, 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 no. You are learning something new, that neuroplasticity, that post-traumatic growth, that like we have these incredible brains that can shape and reshape. And I love this word shape. You'll hear me say it 1,000 times because it is that sense of malleability, of agency. You know what? I'm going to try that tangible to-do list and see how it works. And even if I first start it and I'm uncomfortable because I don't know if that task should be 3 sticky notes or 1 sticky note, that's okay. I'm figuring it out. It's okay that this doesn't feel like the best thing ever yet. It's like, and it may not. It's okay if you try it out and you're like, no, that isn't my thing. No problem. And it may take a little time to get into that groove. Now, personally, I love the figuring it out stage, right? I love the getting on a new project and then like sussing out like, okay, what are the dynamics? Who's doing what? Where? All that stuff.
Yeah.
Being okay with being uncomfortable and just cultivating that, knowing that's just
Absolutely.
part of the process.
Well, and the thing about being uncomfortable is that it's like a muscle, it's a skill. And so if you've never used it, you're never going to have it. And if you only use it periodically, you're going to lose it, right? But we can build the skill, and there's nothing like the sense of pride, which generates, spikes our dopamine that we feel when we can just kind of sit in the discomfort. Even something as silly as go for a walk and leave your phone at home. Like, why do we feel so connected? It's like these little things. Okay, so I have a question, and then this is the longest podcast ever, but I'm just fascinated by you and what you do. How do you know if you're a visual thinker?
Such a good question. The first thing first is this is not a binary. It's
Mm,
not you're a visual thinker or you're not. Like we mentioned before, it's not your left brain or your right brain. I, this might come as a surprise to people. We are three-dimensional people in three-dimensional space. We are whole human beings who have brains and eyes and hands and bodies and guts and intuitions and all these things. So that's the first things first. Is it's not a either or. And like I mentioned before, this particular woman, this child psychologist, Linda Kreger Silverman, she found that in looking at these patterns and way people think, that it turned out 2/3 of us tend to be this way.
mm.
So I think that already anyone who's like hurt their neck nodding so much during this episode, I think for a lot of us it's the we love to learn with our hands. So any of us who really liked the subjects in school that were more about experiments and trying things out and physically using our hands and our bodies, that's a good signal. I think that first, I think that your son's example in math, those of us who do come up with something all at once and have difficulty showing our work is another great sign because it's like it is that brain that is always thinking about it. More examples. Those of us who are always noticing patterns.
Mm. Well, and that's ADHD, right? So probably all of us. But I think, don't you? Oh my God, Brandy, we are taught, yeah, sorry, we are taught that that's not as valuable. And it starts with the way education works. So I just in my head, so I built a high-end women's wear line. 60% of our business was Saks, Neiman's, and Nordstrom. And I initially had hired a designer, right? Someone who drew what it was that I was trying to get across, right? Whatever the design was in my head, she would draw it. And I got so frustrated with that because I felt like we just weren't connecting. But in my brain, I had this idea that I just can't draw. I'm not artistic like that. I'm a creative, but no, I can't draw. And it stemmed from my mom always saying, everything I draw turns into a pig. So I started to say, everything I draw looks like a pig. Like literally, I draw like a pig, right? This is what I did though. I got so frustrated that I went and I took a class. I think it was at FITM. I don't know. Whatever the fashion school is that we have in San Francisco. I took a fashion illustration class. And oh my gosh, I learned that drawing the human form was all about understanding proportion, right? And I ended up doing so well in that class that they put my big fashion illustration in the front of the building in one of those cases. But I literally had thought, I can't do this. I don't know how to do this. So I think that is so much of it, right? We have this idea that what is valued in society is are the facts, statistics, math, science, all of that. And it's the creative pursuits that aren't. And so it's almost like we talk ourselves into the fact that, oh, I'm not creative in that way. Do you think that's totally true? Like, can anybody learn how to draw? Is visual facilitation a teachable skill?
Absolutely, 200%. I'm going to take us back. You heard me. You heard me tell a story about being in that little baby butler drawing plaid,
Yeah.
right? And your story of your mom saying everything looks like a pig.
But not to me. That was to her. Like her, but I adopted it even because that happened to her.
Interesting. So you got like
Even
secondhand
worse.
inner critic,
Told me
right?
this. Yeah.
So taking each one of us can go in our own wayback machine, right?
Yeah.
And I can't say 100% of kids draw. A lot of them do. A lot of them do, right? And when we were drawing as that little squirt, again, like you asked, like when you're young and before folks have told you who you should or shouldn't be, those drawings were an incredible tool that you use to make meaning for yourself. Mm. And it was stuff that was coming out of your imagination, right? Like it was just this, like, it was this tool, it was this thing, it was this, like, it was joyful. It was just like, hey, let me try this. Like, what can I magically put on this piece of paper with my crayons today, right? There's all this excitement and joy and just playfulness and wonder, curiosity. And because I teach people to do a certain kind of drawing for a living, because one form of that is facilitating literally standing in front of people drawing for a living, one aspect of what I do, I've heard so many of those stories where somebody can tell me exactly how old they were, what they were drawing, and who told them they couldn't draw. Mm. And that switch flips off. It's, in your case, you heard it from your mom and you told yourself that story. And you noticed, I love that you took that class and that, that's for, it sounds like for you, that switch got flipped back on when that instructor said, this is about proportion. The human body is about proportion. And you're like, I got it. I'm designing high-end women wear. This makes all the sense in the world. Great. Now that's my in. That switch is back on. So then you had this tool to express these ideas around these designs. Yeah. Now, what's heartbreaking, what's very sad, is how common these stories are. And, what happens is people equate that if somebody's creative, they're creative usually in visual arts, in drawing, right? Now, there's other forms of that. You can be creative with dance and theater and music and all sorts of fantastic things. Unfortunately, people flatten it down, often narrow it down to drawing, visual arts. And what happens is that adult, usually it's an adult, sometimes it's very rarely in those stories, it's usually a parent. Sometimes it's either a teacher or a parent. Sometimes it's a sibling. It's nearly never somebody their same age. And sometimes it is you comparing yourself to somebody else, where it's kind of internal, right? The person turning off that switch. What's happening is those adults are so separated from their own act of joy, making those drawings, and they are judging that drawing as a product. And they're judging that drawing that, like your mom's great example of, she wanted to draw a horse, but it looked like a pig, right? Like that's all those ways that, that we're thinking this drawing has to represent a thing in the real world. Mm. And if it isn't representational, if I draw your portrait and it doesn't look like you, I failed, right? That is the narrowest, slimmest definition of drawing. It's teeny, teeny, tiny. And what you held up and showed about mapping out your origin story, that is a drawing. I like to say even those walls of sticky notes, in a way that they're drawing. because they're tangible and they're spatial. So, and sadly, another layer of this is those adults judging it as a product. A whole lot of them are thinking, so horrible. They're thinking, well, I can't have an artistic kid because if I have an artistic kid, they're going to try to be an artist. If they're artists, they're not going to make a living and then they're going to fail. And it's like, whoa, 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 whoa. You
Yeah.
have a little kiddo doing something that they enjoy, that's a way of making meaning for themselves. That's it. They could become a doctor who draws. They can become a lawyer who draws. They can become an artist who draws. They can become a mother who draws, who never loses that ability to just get stuff out and express themselves.
I love it. Thank you so much. What do you think the key to living successfully with ADHD is?
I love this question because I absolutely believe that I love this question because, like you say at the top of every show, and I love hearing throughout every one of these episodes, every interview, is that it's about understanding who you are and being who you are and not trying to force yourself into somebody else's pattern or mold. And I'm not saying that's easy for everybody. I took an Uber over to my studio today and I just happened to have a conversation with a woman who said, I'm really happy driving Uber, but my parents don't think this is valid, right? So many of us have those outer critics saying, well, why aren't you X, Y, and Z? Instead of saying, you know what? I'm A, B, and C, which is pretty freaking awesome.
Yeah.
And understanding that however we are built, I always think about, who we are, how we're wired, our chemistry, our anatomy. Like there's just every one of us, I know, and we have our strengths and we have our weaknesses. All of us. And the more self-awareness, the more we can work to those strengths. And the more we can say, with the weaknesses, we can either say, okay, I'm just going to steer away from those, or I can't and I need to figure out how to adapt. None of it is about us being wrong or broken. We might be weirdos, but I like weirdos.
Yeah.
And we're going to find our fellow weirdos. Honestly, one of the biggest things for folks who feel isolated and alone and they feel broken because they're neurodiverse, just go find your peeps.
Yeah.
We're really interesting people.
Yeah. You're in the wrong environment.
That's it. That's it. I think being around the wrong people in the wrong environment or not having built an environment that works for you. I think that's really the key to being successful and being happy exactly as you are.
Well, and the only way you can do that is what you say, right? You need to be more of who you are because otherwise, yeah, you're totally in the wrong environment if you're around people that think you are, that you're doing all that masking basically. So you are such a delight. So, Brandy, where can people find you if they want to know more about you and what it is that you do?
Excellent. So it's funny, we're just talking about dental health, if this stays in the edit. My site is loosetooth.com. I've had my website since 1999. It doesn't describe what I do, but people remember it. So you'll always find me at loosetooth.com. I will put up a page, loosetooth.com/smartass, all one word, to be able to share a couple of things we referenced in this call. You could certainly explore the site. It's a lot of good stuff, a lot of great resources for learning these specific skills or rediscovering these skills that you probably already have, are already ways you work, but let's give you some concrete ways to use the ways you work best. And, every month I have a Q&A session. So if you're curious about this and you want to hop on the Q&A call, I always host this call. It very much is about helping. I share a couple models I really like. One very specifically about broadening that definition of drawing. And a second one that's about all types of visual thinkers, all these different ways we can use visual thinking. So again, you aren't a visual thinker or not. I think a vast majority of people who are hearing us already recognize themselves in what we're saying. And let's talk about how to just keep building on those strengths you have.
I love the video on your website. That is so clever and so creative and really works.
Is that the homepage one with the
Yes, yes, where you've got all these things in your pocket and you're pulling them out, explaining what it is that you do. I love it. And then I think you also do these retreats, right? Where you can go to Chicago for 3 days and you teach people how to use. So is it to use visual facilitation, or is it really about learning about their executive functions and then applying the visualization to that? So filling in those gaps. And actually, it's not filling in those gaps, it is focusing on your strengths.
Absolutely. Great questions. So, for anyone who's interested in executive function, that is a workshop called Brilliant, How Visual Thinking Lights Up Your Mind.
Uh-huh.
So, that's where you get all the good concrete, like that next layer of understanding and self awareness, and exactly how visual thinking tools help you bridge those gaps and work to your strengths. And certainly, that you mentioned the 3 day in Chicago, that's something called the lab. And that is it is 3 day immersion into this stuff, which I know is broad. Some people come in because they want to specifically develop visual thinking. Some people are there because they are in a facilitation role and they want to learn that. Some folks are just kind of at a crossroads and they're like, I don't know why I'm here, but I want to spend 3 really intense days in this space with that lady. And that works too. So there's lots of good resources. Always happy to answer questions for folks to help point them in the right direction.
Thank you so much for so much time with us here today. It was such a privilege and pleasure to meet you.
It was my absolute pleasure. Thank you for the wonderful opportunity and invitation.
So that's what I have for you for this week. If you liked this episode with Brandy, please let us know by leaving a review. Our goal is to change the conversation around ADHD, helping as many women as we possibly can learn how their ADHD brains work so that they too may discover their amazing strengths. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll see you here next week. Since we recorded our conversation, Brandy has opened up registration for Envision, her annual virtual event for visual thinkers, or as she likes to call it, the Smarty Party for all of us who are the hands-on folks who think more clearly with pens and post-it notes in hand. Envision will be held October 18th through the 20th, and you can go to loosetooth.com/smartass to learn more about the tangible to-do list, the Envision event, and so much more.